Hi everyone, this week I'm going to be looking at a subject which I don't usually talk about, Robin Hood. So unlike with King Arthur or the Trojan War, I don't really have any strong opinions about Robin Hood. But there are a few theories which I'm aware of which I think are very good, but I'm not really convinced about which one of them is right. So in the past I spoke about a particular theory regarding the origin of the 143 merry men who may be related to the rebels during the Despenser War. But today I'm going to be talking about a different theory. So this is a theory which connects Robin Hood to a historical outlaw who's known to have been active in the Nottingham area called Roger Godberd. Now what's interesting about Roger Godberd is that we know from the contemporary records which mention him that he was a very prominent outlaw, apparently very successful, and these contemporary records mention that he was able to call on over 100 men to assist him. So when we compare that to the story of Robin Hood, that seems to tie in very well. Robin Hood was said to have had his band of merry men, 143 of them supposedly. So the fact that we have this historical outlaw who was active in the right area, in the Nottingham area, with such a large group of men to assist him, that seems to tie in very well. But in addition to just the fact that he was said to have been a prominent outlaw, very successful, active in the right area, with a large group of men assisting him, in addition to that, there's also the chronology that works in his favour as well. Because according to one of the earliest records that mentions Robin Hood, not one of the earliest stories, but one of the earliest references to him, he was said to have been an outlaw in the time of King Henry. But in one of the earliest actual stories, A Little Jest of Robin Hood, the king is named as King Edward. So the King Henry mentioned by that reference I just referred to doesn't say which King Henry it was, just a King Henry. And the reference to King Edward in the actual Robin Hood story also doesn't mention which Edward. It just mentions him as being named Edward. So rather than being a contradiction or talking about two different Robin Hoods, there's actually a way of harmonizing this. You see, the reign of Henry III was followed by Edward I. So if Robin Hood was someone who was active from the time of Henry III through to the time of Edward I, that would actually fit these two apparently contradictory references perfectly. Now, as it happens, that's exactly the case with Roger Godberd. He became an outlaw during the last few years of the reign of King Henry III, and then most of his career was set during the reign of King Edward I. So that also harmonizes with these different references to the king ruling at the time of Robin Hood. Now, in addition to that, even further, is the fact that in that tale of Robin Hood that I just mentioned, A Little Jest of Robin Hood, the King Edward in question doesn't just appear, but he actually, at the end of the story, ends up pardoning Robin Hood. And as it happens, it's known from the contemporary records that Roger Godberd was actually pardoned by King Edward I. So various details seem to tie in very well with the story of Robin Hood, comparing it to the life of Roger Godberd. Now, regarding the name, Roger Godberd, well, obviously that's not the same as Robin Hood, but we know, again from these contemporary records, we know that Robin Hood was used as a kind of nickname for outlaws in that time. There are even manuscripts where a certain outlaw's name has been crossed out with Robin Hood written over it. So we know that the term Robin Hood seems to have been an expression or a nickname for outlaws, or at least certain types of outlaws in that time, in the 13th century, the very century in which Roger Godberd lived, and also, I believe, the following century as well. So the fact that Roger Godberd didn't have the right name doesn't mean that he couldn't have been Robin Hood. He could well have simply been referred to Robin Hood in the same way that these other outlaws in certain manuscripts have their names changed to the nickname Robin Hood. But there's also the fact, well, the little problem of the fact that in the earliest tale that mentions King Edward, as the king who was around in the time of Robin Hood. It specifically notes his itinerary during his travels through England, and it mentions that he stayed in Nottingham for 2 weeks. Now, the only King Edward who ever did those exact actions was Edward III, and he visited Nottingham for 2 weeks in the year 1323, which is why in my previous video about the subject I linked the merry men to the survivors of the rebel army during the Despencer War, which was in 1322. A large portion of the army was said to have fled during the night just before the final defeat of the rebel army. So that would seem to tie in very well with the idea that the following year many of those rebels are still outlaws in that same area, dressed in green as the rebel army was said to have been dressed in. So that's the attraction in that theory. The chronology ties in. It comes the very year before 1323, which is the only year that matches the precise details in that story, Little Jester of Robin Hood. Whereas Roger Godberd, although he was pardoned by a King Edward, the King Edward in question didn't visit Nottingham for 2 weeks and follow the exact itinerary mentioned in the story. So you see the issue here. You see why I'm not so sure which one is right. So Roger Godberd definitely has a lot in favour of him. There's a lot supporting this theory, but it's not consistent with all the details. Maybe the person who wrote this story, Little Jester of Robin Hood, maybe they just got a bit confused about the details of the Edwards who visited Nottingham. That's possible. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below.